Right, all set?
Yes, sir.
Should we start?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening episode of Pursue. And this is Pursue 12J Respiratory System, and we are streaming live from Apollo Hospital, Navi Mumbai via Kolkata. Very interesting topic, pathology of lung tumors. This is a session 1. And to talk on that, we have a very eminent, very efficient and very knowledgeable person, Dr. Vrinda Sheth. She is an MBBS DNB pathology, DIP FRC path from London. She also done a postdoctoral fellowship in neuropathology from MUHS. She received a medical degree from BJ Medical College, Pune. Then went to do her postgraduate training from Dinanath Mangeshkar Hospital, Pune. Then after that, she received histopathology and oncopathology training in Hinduja Hospital. And then she did her postdoctoral in neuropathology from Seth GS Medical College and KEM Hospital, Mumbai. She was a former consultant histopathologist at Apollo Gleneagles Hospital, Kolkata. Presently, she is a consultant histopathologist at Apollo Hospital, Navi Mumbai. She has won several awards and prizes on oral papers and poster presentation. She is also a co-author of a book, Health, Education and Preventive Medicine and Practical Pharmacognosia, with many international and national presentations. Before I ask Dr. Seth to take over, let me request you to keep your mic muted, your camera off, and please don't share your screen. With this, let me request Dr. Vrinda Sheth, ma'am, please share your screen and let's start.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, sir, for that kind introduction. Let me start with thanking you for giving me this opportunity. And I must say this is a great initiative that you have taken, and we applaud you, sir, for that. I'm sure many pathologists are benefiting from this program. So can you see my screen?
I can see your screen, just share your PPT. Right, please make it full screen and change your pointer to laser pointer. Right, please start. Thank you.
Yeah. So let me start with a case scenario. We have a 45-year-old female from India. She's a non-smoker with a peripheral lung mass and metastasis. Now, what is your diagnosis? So you will tell me, ma'am, we'll need a biopsy. But if I tell you from the clinical history, we can actually think of a diagnosis. Here, she's a female, she's a young female, she's from Asian ethnicity, she's a non-smoker and has a peripheral lung mass which is in an advanced stage with metastasis. So probably we are looking at an adenocarcinoma. So now if I tell you if that adenocarcinoma has micropapillary pattern and hobnail cells and ask you what do you expect on NGS report, and I tell you this is possible because in the lecture we are going to see how morphology can actually lead us to the molecular pathology. So here what do you expect on NGS report? An EGFR mutation. So now if I ask you how will you treat, all of you will answer a tyrosine kinase inhibitor, erlotinib. So with that, let me start my first session on lung tumors. It's a very vast topic, so I've decided to do it in 2 parts. Now, lung cancer is currently the most frequently diagnosed major cancer and the most common cause of cancer mortality. Globally, 2.1 million new cases and 1.8 million lung cancer deaths. That's a huge number. So adenocarcinoma still remains the most common malignancy of lung. In India, though, squamous cell carcinoma is still in high numbers. The male-female ratio is almost the same. In fact, over the years, the male smokers rate has gone down, and that is why the tumors in males have also gone down. Age is generally in the elderly, which is more than 55-60 years. Hardly any tumor is seen in less than 40 years of age. Patient will present with more or less the same similar pulmonary symptoms like cough, weight loss, dyspnea, chest pain, hemoptysis, fever, depending upon the location of the tumor, whether it's central or peripheral. And also there is something called as paraneoplastic syndrome, which occurs in lung tumors at a huge rate. So what is the etiology of lung cancer? Now, unlike many other tumors, lung tumors have actually got an etiology. So many people keep asking you questions about the etiology of cancer, and like we just know some of the tumors like head, neck, face, or some oral cancers where you can say ki, chewing tobacco can cause cancer. So similarly, lung tobacco smoking is connected with lung cancers almost in 80% of the cases. There is 60 times greater risk in habitual smokers, that is 2 packs a day for 20 years. Lung cancer develops in only 10 to 15% of smokers. So not all the smokers will get the tumor. Now, why is this? Because genetics play a role here, and there is an activation of a P450 monooxygenase enzyme system. So there are things in the body which actually will cause pro-carcinogens to convert into carcinogens. And that is why not all smokers will have this tumor. Then there are second-hand smokers, passive smokers, environmental tobacco smokers. These also are affected, and they lead to almost 3,000 deaths per year. Now, lung cancer in never smokers. So like the case that I discussed in the beginning, I had given a history of non-smoking. So never smokers have also do get these tumors, and it is almost seen in 25% of them. These are commonly women. They commonly have adenocarcinoma, and they often have targetable mutations and co-mutations. More likely, they have EGFR mutations, and almost never KRAS mutation. So always remember, KRAS mutation is associated with smoking history. And EGFR mutation can occur in smoking as well as non-smoking history. So TP53 mutations are not uncommon, but less frequent than the smoking-related cancers. Other causes are industrial hazards. We all know asbestos is the major thing in industrial hazards. And asbestos plus smoking, that is a dangerous combination. Almost 55-fold risk is there. High-dose ionizing radiation from the atomic bomb blast, the Chernobyl disaster, in the miners, where you have uranium, radon gas, etc. This is another cause of lung cancer. Air pollution, as we all know, is also one of the causes. Now we have a lot of acquired mutations, and these are stepwise accumulation of oncogenic driver mutations that result in conversion of a normal benign pulmonary epithelial cell into a neoplastic cell. So these stepwise accumulation of mutations, they lead to tumors, and these mutations are different for different tumors. Like adenocarcinomas will have different genes encoding for receptor tyrosine kinases like EGFR, ALK, ROS1, MET, RET. Then they also have gain of function mutations in serine threonine kinases. So the examples of this is BRAF, V600E, and PI3K. KRAS gene is also involved in almost 30% of the tumors, and these genes are all involved in this tyrosine kinase pathways. So see here, RAS is here. It is in the pathway of the tumor of the same mechanism where EGFR is also involved. So that is why all of them lead to the same pathway, and hence they are mutually exclusive. Any one mutation can cause the tumor to happen. So you don't need more than one mutation for the tumor. Why is it important to accurately diagnose? Initially, people used to be okay with non-small cell and small cell. But now with molecular targeted therapy, immunotherapy with PD-L1, and also there is difference of chemotherapy in adenocarcinomas and squamous cell carcinomas. So Pemetrexed, which is a platinum-based chemotherapy, is used. It is more effective in adenocarcinoma. Rather, gemcitabine is more effective in squamous cell carcinoma. Also, why is it important to actually diagnose squamous cell carcinoma? Because bevacizumab should not be given to patients with squamous cell carcinoma because they have a risk of life-threatening hemorrhage. Also, small cell lung carcinoma, it generally is a very high-grade tumor and it presents in a very advanced stage. So it presents with metastasis most of the time, and in that case, surgery cannot be done. So diagnosing a small cell lung carcinoma is important because of its high grade, bad prognosis, and chemoradiotherapy is the treatment in it. So now, according to the mutations, when I was discussing the case, I was talking about the histomorphology, the gender, which was a female, then the age, ethnicity, and then I went to the treatment part. So all this is correlated. So like in EGFR mutations, there are 4 mutations. Out of them, L858R and in-frame deletion of exon 19. These two are the commonest and they account for almost 90% of these tumors. So EGFR mutations occur in non-smokers and females are more affected. It is almost 30 to 40% in Asians. So Asians, females, non-smoker, and then on the biopsy, you can get any pattern, but adenocarcinoma in situ, lipidic pattern, papillary pattern, micropapillary pattern, these are more commonly found. And these are invariably TTF1 positive. So EGFR is just not, it also has a treatment thing, tyrosine kinase inhibitor, but it is also a prognostic factor. So tyrosine kinase inhibitors, there are 3 generations already out. The first generation, we all know erlotinib. The second generation has afatinib, and these 2 generations have developed resistance, and that is because of primary and secondary 2 type of resistance. One resistance, the primary resistance is because of mutation in the EGFR gene itself on exon 20, and the secondary resistance is because of T790M mutations. So these are recognized, proven resistance to the first and second generation tyrosine kinase inhibitors. So they have come up with the 3rd generation, which is osimertinib. That is why it is very important to diagnose adenocarcinoma. And when we are seeing the biopsy, if we think there is lipidic, papillary or micropapillary pattern, we should, and when there are limited tests available, we should go first for EGFR. Anyway, in any adenocarcinoma, the first test that you do is an EGFR. So KRAS, I told you, is seen in smokers. It is 90% of the times, it is in any morphology, but in 90% of the cases of mucinous adenocarcinomas have KRAS. So there's a strong association between mucinous adenocarcinoma and KRAS. It is lower in Asians, and maybe there is a male preponderance, but it is seen with a history of smokers. So when you have a history of smoking, you have mucinous adenocarcinoma, you think of KRAS. And since these are mutually exclusive, you will obviously get EGFR negative. And in this case, if you, without doing any test, if you give erlotinib, the patient is not going to respond. And there is going to be resistance to erlotinib because these are mutually exclusive. EGFR is not there. So no erlotinib business over here. The next type is the EML4 ALK fusion. Now this is different from the ALK mutation that we see in anaplastic large cell carcinomas. This is a very specific fusion which is seen in adenocarcinomas of the lung with acinar or solid morphology and signet ring type cells. So if you get any of these, you actually go for an ALK test. So ALK can be done by IHCs or FISH, and EGFR doesn't have an IHC as yet. And so ALK can be done by IHC, and you can go ahead with the treatment. The treatment is with, again, crizotinib and alectinib. It is not a prognostic factor like the way EGFR is. Similarly, there is ROS1 rearrangement. Now, this is seen with solid and cribriform pattern, and it is seen in non-smokers. Crizotinib again is the drug of choice, and the testing is done by NGS, which is next generation sequencing, or FISH. BRAF V600E mutation, which we see in thyroid papillary carcinomas and in the brain and etc. The same mutation is there in papillary, micropapillary, as well as these are the types of adenocarcinomas, papillary and micropapillary, and also in some squamous cell carcinoma. We have targeted therapy for BRAF also, that is dabrafenib and trametinib. Similarly, there is PIK3CA and FGFR fibroblast growth factor. Now, FGFR fibroblast growth factor is seen in squamous cell carcinoma. And this is again, so all of these are mostly for adenocarcinoma, but in squamous cell carcinoma, you have FGFR. And that, the targeted therapy for that is infigratinib. So this table gives you a brief idea what morphology can be, how morphology can be correlated with the mutations, and you can, if there are limited resources and you have to ask only for one IHC and you have the classic morphology, maybe you can go with that same test. This is again EGFR mutation. This is amplification on FISH. I told you there are 4 mutations from 18 to 21. The most commons are 19, 20. Then PDL1, this is a hot topic, and so PDL1 is an immune modulator that promotes immunosuppression. It inhibits an immune-mediated attack, so it doesn't allow our body to fight or to attack the cancer cells. This it does by binding to PD1 on cytotoxic T cells. Now, anti-PD1 or anti-PDL1 antibodies that we have, like we have pembrolizumab, which is a US FDA approved drug. These antibodies keep the immune on check and they cause immune-mediated attacks to happen. So then they allow our immunity, our body's immunity to fight the cancer cells. So now US FDA has approved different assays for identifying the positivity of these antibodies. So for pembrolizumab, you have an assay using the 22C3 antibody. Now they also have and there are many more. Out of them, 3 are almost done and 2 of them are in clinical trials. The most commonly used is pembrolizumab. Now there is a criteria of scoring for PDL1 on IHC. Any membranous staining, partial or complete, is called as positive. Now it should be more than 50% for first line treatment with anti-PDL1. But even if it is less than 50%, the staining, if there is less than 1% staining, it is no staining. So then don't give the treatment with PDL1 antibodies. But even if it is 1 to 49%, then it comes in the second line treatment. And there are many studies which have proven that even 1 or 2% positivity tumors also have responded well to antibodies like pembrolizumab and etc. Now coming to the WHO classification of lung tumors. They are epithelial tumors, mesenchymal tumors, lymphohistiocytic tumors, tumors of ectopic origin, metastatic tumors. We will be dealing today with epithelial tumors, and out of them, except the neuroendocrine tumors, we'll finish adenocarcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma and large cell carcinoma. The relative proportions of the major categories are adenocarcinoma is the most common, about 50%, then squamous and small cell, and the rarest is large cell carcinoma. And then others, adenosquamous and large cell neuroendocrine, all those things come in others. Coming to adenocarcinoma, it is a peripheral tumor generally. So there is a grey white mass which is irregular. Then here there is puckering of the pleura, again a peripheral mass, and on the edges you can see little feathering. So lipidic pattern gives a gross appearance of feathery edges, and inside it could be any pattern. It could be a solid, micropapillary, papillary, etc. But on the edge, many tumors do have a lipidic pattern. I will be discussing what lipidic pattern means. This is a central tumor. So adenocarcinomas can present centrally, and here it has invaded through the pleura into the adipose tissue with hilar nodes, etc. Now this is an endobronchial adenocarcinoma. It is arising from the lower lobe segmental bronchus, almost occluding the bronchus. Now adenocarcinoma by definition should have, it is a malignant epithelial tumor, and it should have glandular pattern. You see all these glands, or mucin, you see mucin, intracellular mucin, or any of the pneumocyte markers. So this thing has been added in the WHO 2015, where even if the tumor is a poorly differentiated tumor, where it's in solid, there are solid areas of tumor cells and you cannot make out a glandular pattern or mucin, if the tumor cells are positive for TTF1 or napsin A, you call it an adenocarcinoma. Now this terminology differs in case of biopsies and resection specimens, which we'll come to later. Now, tumors and adenocarcinomas have two types of morphology according to the origin of the cell, the tumor. So, Clara cells and type 2 pneumocytes, both of them can get modified, get transformed into neoplasm. So, the Clara cells, these are tall columnar cells with apical nuclei and eosinophilic cytoplasm. So, the tumor will also look like that only. Only the nuclear morphology is bad. Now, type 2 pneumocytes are generally cuboidal cells. So, here even the tumors will have cuboidal morphology and they have large intranuclear inclusions, and the nuclei are dark, hyperchromatic, and all those the features of any other malignancy. Now, there are, you have heard of vascular invasion, lymphatic invasions, pleural invasion, direct spread. There's something which has come up which is spread through air spaces, and this is an adverse prognostic factor in WHO 2021. So what is spread through air spaces? Firstly, you see it at the edge of the tumor. So this is the tumor, and then at the edge you see these alveolar spaces. Now in the alveolar spaces, if you can make out, there are small nests of tumors. Here they are more prominent. They are in the shape of rings, in tufts, in micropapillary pattern, or just single cells, and they are just floating in the alveolar spaces. So this is spread through air spaces, and they are not attached to the tumor. They are away from the tumor, but you can see them at the edge. So if this is present, it is an adverse prognostic factor. Now, classification of adenocarcinomas, and I have mentioned specifically in resection specimens because in biopsies the same nomenclature is modified, and you don't use the same names. Now, classification, you have pre-invasive lesions, you have invasive adenocarcinoma with a predominant pattern, where you just call it with predominant pattern. And the next year you call the adenocarcinoma by its name. Like if you have a colloid pattern tumor, you call it colloid adenocarcinoma. But in this case, you call it adenocarcinoma with acinar predominant pattern or lipidic predominant pattern. So, first, we'll deal with pre-invasive lesions. Now, there are three pre-invasive lesions. One is atypical adenomatous hyperplasia, which is less than 0.5 centimeter in size. Then there is adenocarcinoma in situ. This is typically less than 3 centimeter in size, but more than 0.5 centimeter in size. And it could be mucinous, non-mucinous, or mixed. Then there is minimal invasive carcinoma. So it is like adenocarcinoma in situ only, but there will be less than 5 mm invasion. So, like we see in breast, atypical adenomatous hyperplasia will correspond to something which is like atypical hyperplasia. Adenocarcinoma in situ is something like BCIS, and minimal invasive carcinoma is something like microinvasion. So, similarly, of course, the morphology and the terminology differs, but just to remember, there is one atypical hyperplasia, then there is an in situ carcinoma, and there is minimal invasion, which is just 5 mm in size. Now, atypical adenomatous hyperplasia, the most important point is they are all lipidic patterns. So, all these three pre-invasive lesions that I just told all have a lipidic pattern of growth. Now, lipidic pattern is when the tumor cells grow along the alveolar spaces. So, this is the normal alveola and the tumor cells have grown along it only. So, there are atypical cells and they are in lipidic pattern. So, first point is lipidic pattern. Second thing is all these three are differentiated on their sizes. So, atypical adenomatous hyperplasia is mostly less than 5 millimeter in size. It can be multiple singles. So, here grossly you can see one tiny lesion. So, this is atypical adenomatous hyperplasia. It is seen separately from the other normal lung parenchyma. On a scanner view also you can make out there is a lesion over here. But it is not invading, it is sitting and it looks more or less like the normal alveolar with some atypical cells, some dark hyperchromatic cells. On the higher power, you can see that there is space. So these are small cuboidal tumor cells, and they are variably, there is nucleomegaly, and it is variable. Somewhere it is small, somewhere it is huge. So there is no uniform atypia here. Secondly, there is gap between every cell. So there is some gap here, then there is some gap over here. So gaps are seen when there is atypical adenomatous hyperplasia. these lesions also show the same mutations like EGFR, KRAS, etc. And they are precursors to non-mucinous adenocarcinoma in situ and invasive adenocarcinoma. Also some squamous cell carcinomas due to field effect. Now adenocarcinoma in situ, again you have the same lipidic pattern, but here if you can see there is no gap between the cells. Also the atypia is very uniform. Everywhere it is almost similarly atypical. So this is adenocarcinoma in situ. Plus there is an abrupt transition between the normal and the abnormal. So adenocarcinoma in situ, according to WHO, it is defined by its size. It should be less than 3 cm. There should be pure lipidic pattern. There should be no stromal, vascular, pleural invasion. There should be no invasive invasion. So there should be no invasion. There should be no invasive patterns. Acinar, papillary, micropapillary, solid. These are all invasive patterns. So only lipidic pattern is allowed in adenocarcinoma. If you see any other pattern, it is invasion. There should be no spread through air spaces, and it can be mucinous or non-mucinous. On morphology, here you can see a small lesion peripherally. It is tan in color and does not affect the parenchyma. It is sitting quietly. Here also there is a mass involving the upper lobe. It has a tan pale appearance and it is well demarcated from the surrounding. So again here if you can see the cuboidal cells, somewhere columnar. So atypical adenomatous hyperplasia is always cuboidal, whereas adenocarcinoma in situ can be columnar also sometimes. There is atypia and the pattern is lipidic. Here you can see some entrapped glands. You may call it invasion, but there is no dysplasia. And there is anthracotic pigment, there is inflammation. And also you can see some macrophages in the lumen. So they are just entrapped glands and they are not invasive glands. There is no desmoplasia. You should have desmoplasia. It's a little difficult to differentiate fibroelastosis and desmoplasia, but with practice you can do it. Now minimal invasive adenocarcinoma, again WHO describes it as by its size, which is less than 3 cm, and by stromal invasion, which should be less than 0.5 cm. If this invasion is more than 0.5 cm, then you call it a invasive adenocarcinoma. You do not call it a minimally invasive adenocarcinoma. The invasive component must have a non-lipidic architecture or demonstrate single tumor cells infiltrating the myofibroblastic stroma. So lipidic is non-invasive and the invasive part should have the patterns which I just told. Here on gross also you can make out this, there is a lesion and then there is some small central solid component which is different from the surrounding. This part is the invasive part, and this should be less than 0.5 cm. This should be less than 3 cm. Here you can see all the 3 lesions. So this is atypical adenomatous hyperplasia here, and then there is this micro-invasive, minimally invasive adenocarcinoma here, and then so the survival advantage and outcome is similar to adenocarcinoma in situ. So though there is a small invasion here, 0.5 cm, but it does not change the outcome of the patient. By definition, you should not have any tumor necrosis or lymphatic, blood vessel or pleural invasion. This is same for adenocarcinoma in situ as well as invasive, minimally invasive adenocarcinoma. The only difference is you have 0.5 cm of invasion. On microscopy here, you can see the lipidic tumor. The entire thing is a tumor with lipidic pattern. But here, this much is the invasive part. It is a solid component destroying the parenchyma. So this is less than 0.4 cm. So this is minimally invasive. Here you can see some glands infiltrating, again acinar pattern. So this is minimally invasive. Here you can see the glands infiltrating, single cells, small glands, irregular glands infiltrating. So this is an invasive adenocarcinoma. Now coming to the actual invasive adenocarcinoma, where you see invasion more than 5 mm. And then I told you there are 2 types. One is with the predominant pattern and the others are the variants. So we'll discuss the predominant patterns. Now the latest WHO, the 5th edition, has actually graded these patterns, and according to them, lipidic predominant pattern is grade low grade. and solid and micropapillary pattern is high grade. Everything else comes in the intermediate grade. So remember that solid and micropapillary predominant pattern, these are very high grade patterns. Now, why is it important? Because they have come up with a grading system where they are graded 1, 2, 3, well, moderate, and poor differentiated. So in well differentiated, you have lepidic pattern, and the high grade pattern, which is solid or micropapillary, is less than 20%. So whenever you describe these patterns on the report, you have to describe it in increments of 5%. So lepidic pattern is say 60%, then acinar pattern is 20%, or micropapillary pattern is 5%. So it should be in increments of 5%. So here, if it is less than 20% and you have a lepidic pattern, it is a well differentiated lesion and the prognosis is good. If it is acinar or papillary pattern and the high grade pattern, which is solid or micropapillary, is less than 20% again, then it is a moderate grade and intermediate prognosis. But if there is any pattern and the high grade morphology, that is solid morphology and micropapillary morphology, is more than 20%, it is a poor prognostic factor. Now, a lepidic pattern, the lepidic word comes from Greek lepis, which means scale, and they grow along the alveolar walls. So, whenever you have on a biopsy a lepidic growth, lepidic pattern adenocarcinoma, now you don't know the size of this lesion. So you cannot call it an adenocarcinoma in situ or an atypical adenomatous hyperplasia or minimally invasive adenocarcinoma. You do not know the size of this lesion. So you just call it adenocarcinoma with lepidic pattern and make a comment that invasive component cannot be excluded from this biopsy. So let them come back with the radiology, everything, or maybe in the resection specimens or whatever, but on biopsy you just write adenocarcinoma with lepidic pattern. So I have been talking about these patterns. Let's just go through them. Papillary pattern, it has these branching pattern and with fibrovascular cords inside. Then there's the solid pattern where you see large nests or sheaths. Then the micropapillary pattern, these do not have fibrovascular cores. They look like tufts of cells. Acinar pattern is the regular glandular pattern, irregular glands, the next etc. Then solid pattern with mucin. So initially they used to call it signet ring morphology, where you see mucin inside and the nucleus is pushed to the periphery. But now they call it solid pattern with mucin. This is seen in, so if I remember the table, ALK positivity is seen in such cases. Micropapillary and solid, these are very high grade morphology. So if you stay alert for this, if you see a micropapillary pattern or solid pattern, you know that it's a high grade tumor. Now clear cell morphology is not a pattern, it is just a morphology that is seen many times. So when the tumor is a solid tumor, how do you know it's an adenocarcinoma? It could as well be a squamous cell carcinoma. So before going with the IHCs, you can actually do a mucin stain, like a mucicarmin stain. And if the mucicarmin stain highlights 5 or more tumor cells in each of the 2 high power fields, you can call it an adenocarcinoma. So then it is a solid pattern adenocarcinoma with mucin. Now on cytology, adenocarcinoma will have the acinar pattern, it will have loose clusters of cells, and the tumor cells will be large. They will have high NC ratio, prominent nucleoli, and intranuclear pseudo-inclusions can also be seen. Now coming to the third part of the classification, the variants of invasive adenocarcinoma. So here, the invasive mucinous adenocarcinoma, this is very much like the pre-invasive lesions where you have it in a lepidic fashion. So initially, if you remember the classification, there was mucinous and non-mucinous bronchoalveolar carcinoma which had lepidic pattern. So the non-mucinous bronchoalveolar carcinomas are now adenocarcinoma in situ and minimally invasive carcinomas. But invasive mucinous adenocarcinomas are the former mucinous bronchoalveolar carcinomas. So you can actually predict what will come in this. There will be a lepidic mucinous epithelium in the tumor. Then there is colloid invasive adenocarcinoma, fetal invasive adenocarcinoma, and enteric invasive adenocarcinoma. Now, enteric adenocarcinoma are like colonic adenocarcinomas, but because they are occurring there and they need to be taken care of separately, so it has come separately as a variant in the classification. So, invasive mucinous adenocarcinoma, these are multiple bilateral lesions, and sometimes they can entirely replace the lobe. On histomorphology, they are, see the growth is in a lepidic fashion, and they have basal nuclei and mucin in the cytoplasm. So they look like goblet cells and or columnar mucinous cells with basal bland nuclei. This is a very classical morphology for mucinous adenocarcinoma. Nowadays, the latest fusion that has come up in invasive mucinous adenocarcinoma is CD74 NRG1 fusion, and you can see that on fish also. Also, a specific antibody HNF4 alpha by IHC can be done to detect these tumors. Invasive mucinous adenocarcinoma versus non-mucinous, as I told you, formerly mucinous bronchoalveolar carcinoma and former non-mucinous bronchoalveolar carcinoma. These are now AIS, MIA and LPA. So the difference is, invasive mucinous adenocarcinoma, they are positive for CK20 also, like in colon. Whereas non-mucinous carcinomas are not positive for CK20, they are just CK7 positive. Also, these are TTF1 positive, whereas invasive mucinous adenocarcinomas can be TTF1 negative. So it's very difficult to differentiate it from the other mucinous adenocarcinomas in the body, like from colon or MEX from colon or pancreas, etc., because they have 720 both positive. Also, they have KRAS mutation, whereas the non-mucinous will have EGFR mutation. So KRAS mutation, history of smoking is more common in invasive mucinous adenocarcinomas. As I told you, there is HNF4 alpha positivity and CD74 NRG1 fusion, which is specific for this tumor. Invasive mucinous adenocarcinoma versus metastatic pancreatic upper GI carcinomas. I just told you they look like any other mucinous adenocarcinoma, and also they have CK7 and 20 positivity. So what do you do? And again, they are TTF1 also negative. Very few, only 15% of the cases are TTF1 positive. So what do you do to differentiate between the two? You do a TTF1 napsine. If it comes positive, good for you, call it a primary lung invasive mucinous adenocarcinoma. But what if it comes negative? Then you just defer it for clinical radiological correlation. On radiology, if there is a single mass, you favor lung primary. Though I told you in the beginning that these mucinous adenocarcinomas are many times multifocal and bilateral. So that point you cannot use for differentiating it against metastasis, because even metastasis is multifocal and bilateral. In fact, if you have a known primary, like say pancreas, and the lesion of the lung is solitary, then go for the metastasis, because metastasis is more common than primary lung mucinous adenocarcinoma. And if you have multiple of them, multiple nodules, then that does not indicate metastasis or mucinous. That doesn't help us in any way. Now, IMAs, like invasive mucinous adenocarcinomas, they grow over underlying pneumocytes. So whenever you are seeing a TTF1 or napsine, you can false positive. You can call it false positive because you are actually observing TTF1 positivity in the pneumocytes, which are the normal underlying pneumocytes. So beware of it. You should see TTF1 in the tumor cells. Colloid adenocarcinoma is also a mucinous adenocarcinoma, which has extracellular mucin. So all these alveoli, they are replaced by mucin. This is not air, these are all mucin. And you see tumor cells and mucin pools. So everywhere, so the alveoli are lined by tumor cells. Also, they have mucin pools extracellularly, and tumor cells are floating in those extracellular pools. Again, they are the same. They have the same IHC profile like intestinal tumors, CK20, CDX2, MUC2, and they are weak TTF1, CK56, napsine positive. Fetal adenocarcinoma, these resemble the fetal lung where they don't have cilia and there is subnuclear glycogen. So because of that, there is subnuclear vacuolation. So this reminds us of endometrioid carcinoma, and even there we see evacuation, and there are these tubular papillary structures. So it is very similar to endometrioid carcinoma. So remember, subnuclear glycogen-rich vacuolation and non-ciliated glandular structures. It occurs in young smokers. So they are low-grade and high-grade. Low-grade tumors occur in young smokers, whereas high-grade tumors occur in elderly. You should have at least 50% fetal lung pattern for high-grade tumors. Whereas here in low-grade tumors, mostly it will be more than 90 to 100% will be pure fetal lung pattern. In low-grade tumors, you have low nuclear atypia, and you can see morules. Morules you can also see in endometrioid carcinoma if you remember squamous morules. So here also you see morules, whereas there are no morules in the high-grade tumors. Rather, you see prominent nucleoli, you can see necrosis, or also one more thing which differentiates both of them is TTF1 is positive in low-grade, but it is not positive in high-grade. Low-grade tumors have upregulation in Wnt signaling pathways. That is why they have beta-catenin, nuclear and cytoplasmic positivity. Whereas high-grade tumors do not have this Wnt signaling pathway upregulation, and that is why they are beta-catenin membranous. So you have, if you want to differentiate between the two, beta-catenin can help as well as TTF1 can help. These are found to be chromo and synaptopositive in 90% of the cases, whereas high-grade fetal adenocarcinomas are positive for SAL4, glypican-3 and alpha-fetoprotein 2. The differentials will be endometriosis, but endometriosis will have benign glands. The stoma will be estrogen positive and the tumor will be TTF1 negative. And you will be differentiating it with low-grade fetal adenocarcinoma, obviously. Whereas the metastatic endometrial adenocarcinoma will be ERPR positive and PAC-state positive. Also, you need to have some clinico-radiological correlation. If there is a tumor in the endometrium, then you think of a metastatic endometrial adenocarcinoma. Enteric adenocarcinoma are exactly like colonic adenocarcinoma, both morphologically and immunohistochemically. But only thing is they are primary of the lung. So when it's primary and it exists, so they have kept it in the classification. This is the same pattern as in cribriform, tubulopapillary. There will be stratification, there will be dirty necrosis. Then, so clinically, you should first exclude a colon primary and then only call it enteric adenocarcinoma of the lung. So I told you the classification is mostly for resection specimens. But what if the same lesion we see on biopsy? How do you write the diagnosis? So when you see adenocarcinoma and you are sure of it, just call it adenocarcinoma. You see the glands, you see the mucin, any of them, you just call the adenocarcinoma and you describe the identifiable pattern. You don't call it adenocarcinoma predominant pattern. Like in resection specimen, you actually call it adenocarcinoma predominant pattern and you name the pattern also. But here you just describe it in the microscopy, whereas in the diagnosis, you just call it adenocarcinoma. Now, adenocarcinoma with lipidic pattern. I told you micro-invasive carcinomas as well as adenocarcinoma in situs. All these carcinomas have lipidic pattern. So on biopsy, you don't go ahead and call it anything because you do not have the size of the lesions. They are all size dependent. You cannot make out whether it's micro-invasive or if the invasion is less than 5 mm or more than 5 mm. Whereas on resection specimen, when you have the entire tumor, you can actually name it as micro-invasive or adenocarcinoma in situ, etc. Even if the size is more than 5 mm, you call it invasive adenocarcinoma with a lipidic component. Similarly, these two were non-mucinous. Now the same thing for mucinous also. When you know it's a mucinous adenocarcinoma, just describe the pattern. You will have the same patterns. If it is pure lipidic pattern, then you call it mucinous adenocarcinoma with lipidic pattern and just write a comment, invasive component cannot be commented upon. While in resection, you can actually call it invasive mucinous adenocarcinoma. Now, when you have adenocarcinoma with colloid, fetal or enteric features, on the biopsy you have to write it this way, with colloid, fetal or enteric features. But on resection specimen, you can name the adenocarcinoma on that. Now, when you have an adenocarcinoma where there is no morphology of adenocarcinoma, that is, you don't have glands, you don't have mucin, but you have TTF1 positivity. So when you get a tumor which is solid and poorly differentiated, and you do TTF1 and P40, TTF1 comes positive, P40 comes negative. On biopsy, you write favor adenocarcinoma because the morphology does not favor, but the immunohistochemistry favors. Whereas on resection specimen, you can call it adenocarcinoma because solid pattern sometimes may be just a component, and you may get other patterns also. Similarly, for squamous cell carcinoma, if you have clear-cut morphology, you call it squamous cell carcinoma. You don't have to even do an IHC on small biopsy. If you think that every time IHC is important, when you get a lung biopsy and there is a tumor, you can make out it's malignant, and then what you next to do before calling it squamous or adeno, let's do a IHC. That is not the protocol. If it is a clear-cut squamous cell carcinoma with keratin pearls, with individual cell keratinization, with intercellular bridges, you call it squamous cell carcinoma. If it is not morphologically squamous cell carcinoma, if it's a solid tumor and poorly differentiated, but TTF negative and P40 positive, then you say favor squamous cell carcinoma on biopsy. Whereas on resection specimen, you can directly call it squamous cell carcinoma. Now, when there is no clear-cut morphology, whether it's adeno, squamous, or neuroendocrine, you cannot do anything else. You just call it NOS. But this could as well be a large cell carcinoma on resection specimen with negative IHCs also. So small cell carcinoma can be called small cell carcinoma. So this is the only tumor other than clear-cut squamous and adenocarcinoma which can be called small cell carcinoma on small biopsy because the morphology is very classical. You have nuclear molding, you have small size cells and crushing artifact and very high NC ratio. So all those features and neuroendocrine features will help you call small cell carcinoma on biopsy. Now, when both are present, you will think it's a adenosquamous carcinoma, but you cannot call this on biopsy because you need a specific percentage. For adenosquamous carcinoma, you need 10% of the tumor to have adeno and to have 10% of squamous at least. So that percentage you cannot calculate on biopsy, and that is why you should call this non-small cell carcinoma, NOS, and you describe whatever you want to describe, squamous, adeno, everything. But you can't call it NS, you cannot call it adenosquamous carcinoma. Similarly, when both are present, not on morphology, but on IHCs, and that too in separate areas, so then it can be anything. It can be adenosquamous, it can be squamous, adenocarcinoma, large cell carcinoma with uneven IHCs, etc. Again, on biopsy, you just call it NSCC, NOS. And if you have non-small cell carcinoma with spindle cell or giant cell carcinoma, you have to write it, describe and write it with spindle cell and giant cell carcinoma. Whereas on resection specimen, you can actually call it spindle cell carcinoma or giant cell carcinoma or pleomorphic carcinoma because this could just be the tip of the iceberg. There could be a huge tumor beneath which may have another morphology. So that is true for all the cases, and that is the very reason why terminologies are different in biopsies and in resection specimens. So that more or less covers with the adenocarcinoma part. Now let's go to squamous cell carcinoma. Squamous cell carcinoma is the second most common lung carcinoma. It is generally central in location. It occurs in tobacco smokers, and it has a strong association with smoking history. Now, it could be endobronchial, where it is going inside the lumen. It is central, peribronchial. It could be peripheral, and it could have cavitation and necrosis. So central necrosis and cavitation is one of the features of high-grade squamous cell carcinomas. So by definition, you should either have keratinization or you can have intercellular bridges. So this is keratinizing squamous cell carcinoma. This is non-keratinizing, but you can see intercellular bridges very nicely in this slide. So either of them, if you have, you call it squamous cell carcinoma. But if you don't have any of it, then you need to do a squamous marker. So P63, isoform of P63, which is P40, this should be strong and diffuse positive in more than 50% of the cases, because P63 can be positive also in some adenocarcinomas, but then it should be strong and diffuse nuclear positivity in more than 50% of the tumors. Also, it should be TTF1 negative. So if you have TTF1 positive and you have positivity in either of these markers, then you call it an adenocarcinoma. So TTF1 always takes the precedence. If TTF1 is positive, call it adenocarcinoma in a poorly differentiated tumor. And if TTF1 is negative and P40, P63 or CK56 shows membranous positive like any cytokeratin markers. And P40 and P63, they are nuclear markers. They should be more than 50% strong and diffuse. Like in adenocarcinoma, we have acquired mutations in squamous cell carcinomas also. They are mostly tumor suppressor loci at 3P, 9P, which is CDKN2A gene, and 17P, which is P53 gene. All these markers are very common in squamous cell carcinomas. They have amplification of 8P FGFR1, which we saw there is a targeted therapy, infratinib, and they also have fibroblast growth factor receptor tyrosine kinase inhibitor. But what we have to remember is that they do not harbor EGFR and KRAS mutations. Most common mutation is TP53, which is on 17P, as well as 3P and 19P tumor suppressor loci. Now, molecular pathogenesis of squamous cell carcinoma has this sequence of normal epithelium, which is hit by these mutations, and then it gets converted into hyperplasia, then squamous metaplasia, dysplasia, carcinoma in situ, and invasive carcinoma. And the mutations that we just saw are all there. So there are early mutations, there are mid mutations, and then there are later mutations. Now, the precursor lesions can be identified morphology. This is just hyperplasia of the goblet cells, the cilia, the nuclei, basal. Then this is basal cell hyperplasia. This is mild display. This is squamous metaplasia. There you can see that the polarity is not lost. They are still, the maturation can be seen. Here the polarity is little lost. So this is squamous dysplasia. Here you cannot make out anything. The tumor cells are hyperchromatic, they are going haywire, and it is the cellular thickness is increased. So this is a carcinoma in situ. But what you can appreciate is basement membrane is intact. Even here, this is also carcinoma in situ with very high grade morphology of tumor cells, large hyperchromatic nuclei, abundant cytoplasm, but the basement membrane is intact. So this is carcinoma in situ. So squamous dysplasia or carcinoma in situ can be seen as patches, superficial patches, and they are generally seen at the bifurcation of these bronchi, segmental bronchi. Also, they are precursors for high-grade lesions, and generally they are present when there is a history of some pre-invasive lesion of the lung or even a squamous carcinoma of head neck. They are asymptomatic and their incidental findings with some other lesion. Squamous dysplasia are generally smaller in size, whereas squamous carcinoma in situ can be more than 4 to 12 mm. There is grading of the dysplasia, mild, moderate and severe according to the cytological atypia, increased mitosis in the basal 1/3, 2/3 and the upper third. So in mild dysplasia, there is only basal mitosis in the basal 1/3. Whereas in severe dysplasia, the mitosis will reach up to the upper 1/3. Whereas in squamous carcinoma in situ, there will be extreme atypia, there will be no maturation, and entire thickness of the epithelium will be replaced by these tumor cells. But the basement membrane will be intact. Now these are some morphologies of squamous cell carcinomas. Here you can see, similar to the lepidic fashion, it is growing in along the alveolar walls, and in the lumen you can see keratinization. Here you can see necrosis and cystic change, which is common in squamous cell carcinomas. You can have a very solid looking tumor where this is called as alveolar filling pattern. It fills the alveolar with tumor cells, and there is no destruction of the alveolar septa is intact. So this is a very confusing thing because it looks like an adenocarcinoma. It has a pseudoglandular pattern, but this has happened because of the tumor cell dropouts and necrosis. These cells need to be taken care of with IHCs. You need to do P63, P40, TTF1, NAPSIMA. So if it comes P40, this had come P40, P63 positive. So only we are calling it pseudoglandular pattern SCC. It was TTF1 negative. If this tumor comes out to be positive for TTF1 then and P40 negative, then you will have to call it as adenocarcinoma. Squamous cell carcinoma variants are keratinizing, non-keratinizing, and small cell type. So keratinizing and non-keratinizing, we all know it has keratin pearls and intercellular bridges. Non-keratinizing needs IHC, so because you cannot make out keratin properly, solid sheets of tumor cells, you do P40. Now in small cell basaloid variant of squamous cell carcinoma, the tumor cells are very small, just like any other basal cell carcinoma. And you should have more than 50% basaloid component to call it basaloid variant of squamous cell carcinoma. These tumors generally are in nests and lobules, and they have this peripheral palisading. Now centrally you can see keratinization, and then here you can see basal cells, basaloid looking cells with peripheral palisading in nodules. So here also peripheral palisading, and there is necrosis. So these are high grade tumors. The differential here will be small cell carcinoma because of the small size, but small cell carcinomas will have granular chromatin, nuclear molding and crushing. Large cell carcinomas will have prominent nucleoli and P40 negativity. These are P40 positive. These are squamous cells, squamous tumor cells. And large cell neuroendocrine carcinomas will be TTF1 positive and neuroendocrine markers positive. Adenoid cystic carcinomas may look like this, but they generally occur in younger individuals, and then myoepithelial markers will be positive. CD1117 will be positive, and the M by B gene translocation by FISH can be done to actually confirm the diagnosis. Nut carcinomas, which are poorly differentiated tumors, they also have small cells, but we have a specific nut antibody which can be used. We will see these tumors later on. Now, I have been repeatedly telling you, if there is a poorly differentiated tumor, do a TTF1 and P40. If P40 comes positive or P63 comes positive and TTF1 is negative, it is a poorly differentiated squamous cell carcinoma. You can also see clear cell morphology in squamous cell carcinoma. Here the entire tumor shows clear cell morphology. Here focally there is clear cell change. This clear cell change is due to glycogen. So you can do a pass and diastase. So it will be diastase sensitive. Now, I showed you an example of pseudoglandular squamous cell carcinoma. So here also the tumor has acinar pattern. There are gland-like tumor cells, but the TTF1 is negative and P63 is positive. So this is a squamous cell carcinoma, pseudoglandular type. Here, if you see nests of tumor cells, solid nests of tumor cells, and so maybe you may think of a squamous carcinoma, but then TTF1 is also positive and P63 is also focally positive. But I told you P63 should be more than 50% nuclear, strong and diffuse positive. So here TTF1 takes the precedence, and this is an adenocarcinoma. In this case, it's a solid sheet. It's a tumor with solid sheets and large tumor cells. TTF1 is positive, P63 is negative. So this is a classically adenocarcinoma. Though the morphology doesn't lead you anywhere, it doesn't look like adeno, it doesn't look like squamous. In fact, the abundance of cytoplasm looks more like squamous, but because it's TTF1 positive, it is adenocarcinoma. So IHCs do play an important role in diagnosing. It may change your diagnosis sometimes. So take that decision wisely. Now, adenosquamous carcinomas. To call adenosquamous carcinoma as adenosquamous carcinoma, you should have 10% of each of the component in the resection specimen. In the biopsy, if you get 10% of each of the component, that doesn't count. So it is not, as I told you, it is just the tip of the iceberg. There could be a huge tumor out there which could be totally squamous or totally adeno. So you should not call adenosquamous carcinoma as adenosquamous carcinoma on biopsy. Here you can see, this is the squamous morphology. Here you can see some glandular pattern. So glandular tumor cells are positive for TTF1, and here separate areas of squamous morphology are positive for P40. So you have distinct areas which are positive. They do not overlap. If they overlapped, if this P63 was positive in these tumor cells here, then you call it an adenocarcinoma, then TTF1 takes the upper hand. Here, adenocarcinoma and squamous areas, both are there. So they are separate entities, separate areas. Here also again, this is some poorly differentiated squamous cells, and here there are glandular architecture. So this is again adenosquamous carcinoma. Now, large cell carcinoma, initially it was whenever you could not make out anything, all of those tumors were called as large cell carcinomas. But so now there is a proper definition where undifferentiated non-small cell carcinoma that lacks the cytological, architectural and immunohistochemical features of small cell carcinoma, adenocarcinoma or squamous. So the tumor which is not adeno, which is not squamous and which is not a small cell carcinoma, on cytology, on architecture and immunohistochemically, only then you call it a large cell carcinoma. So you rule out all other tumors. Here you can see, so large cell carcinomas can have varied morphology. They have large size of tumor cells and the NC ratio is low, but there is prominent nucleoli. Sometimes the membrane can be distinct, but there are no intercellular bridges. So this looks more or less like squamous cell carcinoma, but this is large cell carcinoma because there are no intercellular bridges and there is no keratinization. Here you can see clear cell morphology. Here you can see little rhabdoid morphology and prominent nucleoli. So large cell carcinomas they have bizarre tumor cells and it's a very mitotically active tumor. It's a high grade tumor. It has dismal prognosis. And it has prominent nucleoli. So this prominent nucleoli will help you differentiate it from large cell neuroendocrine carcinomas where you will have the salt and pepper chromatin, but large cells, and also from small cell carcinomas and also from other tumors. It is CK positive, that is there, but it should be TTF1 negative and P40 negative. So large cell carcinoma diagnosis, again, you cannot make it on cytology or on biopsy specimen. You have to make it only on resected tumors. You just call it a non-small cell carcinoma, NOS. So previously, tumors which were called as large cell carcinomas were later on subtyped again after doing IHCs. So tumors which were positive for TTF1 and napsin A and mucin, they were called adenocarcinoma, solid subtype, because obviously they had a solid morphology and they didn't have any morphology of adenocarcinoma, but only on the basis of IHCs they were reclassified as adenocarcinoma solid subtype. So similarly, for which were positive for P40, P63 and negative for TTF1 and mucin, they were called as non-keratinizing squamous cell carcinomas. And the tumors which are positive for both, they were called as adenosquamous carcinoma. Now, tumors which were negative, they positive for cytokeratins but negative for both, were called as large cell carcinoma with null IHC features and unclear immunohistochemical features if the IHCs did not make sense, and if there were no stains only. If you haven't done IHCs, then with no stains available. You mention whatever is the status of your IHCs and then call it a large cell carcinoma. If you can put it in any of these three categories, well and good. If not, then you do this. So something, a little bit about IHC TTF1. It's a thyroid transcription factor 1, so it will be positive in thyroid also. And it is also positive in few of the colon cancers as well as some gynae cancers. So beware of it. Not if any metastatic tumor is seen in the lung and if it is TTF1 positive, do rule out. So if it is a very classical morphology TTF1 and a primary of the lung, just a solitary mass or something, it will be primary lung. But metastasis can also be sometimes positive. So watch out for that. There are two clones of TTF1, SPT24, which is a more sensitive clone, but it is less specific. And then there is this 8G7G3, which is more specific and it is recommended. TTF1 is positive in extrapulmonary and pulmonary small cell carcinomas, but it is not positive in extrapulmonary carcinoids. So if you have to differentiate a carcinoid from an which is primary from lung and which is primary from say pancreas, and you do a TTF1. So if TTF1 comes positive, it is a primary lung carcinoid. If TTF1 comes negative, then it is a pancreatic carcinoid. But that is not true in case of small cell carcinomas. So TTF1 cannot be used for small cell carcinomas. See, napsin A is another marker which is called novel aspartic proteinases of the pepsin family. It is a new marker. It has similar sensitivity as TTF1, but some adenocarcinomas can stain for one of the two. So it's better if you use together. Then napsin A positive tumors are RCC, clear cell carcinoma of the gynae tract, and minority of thyroid carcinomas, especially oncocytic types. Polyclonal napsin A is more promiscuous. It can come positive in all these tumors. So try and use monoclonal antibody. It is more specific. P63 and P40, I told you should have diffuse and strong positivity. They are markers of squamous and basal cells. P40 is an isoform of P63. It is a more specific isoform of P63. It does not cross-react with adenocarcinomas, whereas P63 comes positive in adenocarcinomas. That is why I have been repeatedly telling you, if TTF1 is positive and P63 is also positive, we call it an adenocarcinoma. But if P40 is there, it is more specific and it will help you in making a diagnosis. Maybe that tumor will come P40 negative. Conversely, P63 is positive in 30% of lung adenocarcinoma, usually focally. P40 does occasionally label adenocarcinomas, usually as focal scattered cells. That I told you, so that is why the 50% cutoff is made. Focal scattered cells doesn't count. So to end the session here, I will discuss another case scenario. I hope this time you will be able to think of it. Young female smoker. So here is a history of smoking. Stage 4 cancer with adenocarcinoma and with signet ring cell morphology on biopsy. Which IHC will you do for deciding the treatment? One IHC and you decide the treatment. So ALK is the answer here. ALK IHC if you do, it will come positive because I told you ALK mutations, ALK fusions are seen in patients with solid morphology with signet ring appearance, and they have a strong association with smoking history. And there is an ALK inhibitor which is available, crizotinib. The references and images have been taken from the following for study and teaching purposes. The WHO classification, Robbins, Spencer's pathology, the new WHO classification of lung tumors, ISLC pathology, update on IHCs for diagnosis of lung cancer, and a pathology update by Jeffrey L. Myers, which was a PPT on internet. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. Please stop presenting so that we can see you. Right, great. Wonderfully presented, Dr. Vrinda, fantastically compiled, and you went at a very confident and a very nice pace, explaining every bit of it, and started and ended on the same note, case presentation with a minor small quiz like, questioning, trying to, focus onto the work profile and the work process of lung tumors. Wonderfully done. Let me check on the YouTube if there are any questions. Please just hold on. There are no questions there on the YouTube. I don't see any questions here as well on the Google Meet. So we will end here, and we will wait for the second session on Monday, 7:30, right?
Right.
Thank you so much. God bless you. Take care. Bye-bye. Please share the PDF so that we can share with the students, right? Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Thank you. Good night. Bye.